Hello, my name is Bernice. I'm 62 years old and I want to share a story that changed my life forever. My own son abandoned me, sick and freezing, in the middle of the mountains, leaving me to die with only my loyal dog, Bear, by my side. I was barely alive, moments from death, shivering and hopeless, when Bear started barking frantically, refusing to leave me. His courage and loyalty saved my life. I slowly recovered, but the memory of that night of betrayal and survival stayed with me every single day. 3 years later, I found myself standing at my son's door. He froze the moment he saw me. I looked him in the eye and said, "Remember me, the mother you tried to kill?" The fear, shock, and regret in his face were nothing compared to the storm of emotions I felt inside. But this is only the beginning. What led him to such cruelty? How did I survive against all odds, and what happened after I returned? There are twists, secrets, and shocking revelations that you won't believe. But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you are watching from. I love reading your comments and knowing where you are. Now let's understand how this story really began. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I paused at the edge of the driveway, the wind slicing through the tailored coat I had chosen with meticulous care. I hadn't felt the cold in years like this, not really. Not since the night Ethan had left me for dead in the mountains. It wasn't the winter air that chilled me, it was the memory of betrayal, the echo of my own heart shattering in that silent wilderness. I inhaled, tasting the faint aroma of pine from the nearby woods, and tried to steady my breathing. Bear, my loyal Siberian husky, shifted at my side, his blue eyes scanning the ornate house with an intensity that made my chest tighten. He knew what was coming, even if I wasn't entirely sure myself. The door opened before I could knock, and there he was, Ethan. His face froze, eyes widening as though the years hadn't softened him at all, but had only sharpened his fear. I felt the familiar surge of anger, that old, bitter taste rising in my throat, yet I forced it down. I had spent 3 years tempering it, molding it into something purposeful. "Remember me," I said, my voice calm, though every muscle in my body was taut with anticipation. "The mother you tried to kill?" A silence fell like a heavy curtain over the room. The chatter of his lavish dinner party dwindled to nothing. Plates paused midair, glasses trembling in their holders. I was not a frail, sickly woman who had shivered in the snow, pleading silently for life to return. I was Bernice, forged in the fires of betrayal and survival, standing tall, silver hair glinting under the chandelier, eyes burning with a quiet storm. My tailored coat hugged my shoulders, but it couldn't fully contain the tension in my spine. The long years of fear and determination coiled within me. Bear stepped forward, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. I felt the surge of his loyalty, that primal connection we had honed in the cold wilderness, and I knew that no one in this room would mistake the gravity of what was happening. He had been my guardian when Ethan had been my executioner. Now, he was my armor. Ethan's gaze locked onto the dog, and I watched the moment recognition flickered behind his panic. The subtle shift in his posture, the way his hands froze mid-air, betrayed him. His grip on a wineglass tightened, then faltered, and the glass slipped, shattering against the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo through every corner of my memory. "Mom?" "But," the police said. His voice cracked, a brittle edge of disbelief threading through it. "They said I was a missing person case that went cold," I interrupted, stepping closer, every movement deliberate. "But the cold didn't take me, Ethan, and neither did your greed." My voice was steady, even though inside, my heart still thumped against my ribs as if it were trying to escape. Every detail of that night, the frozen snow, the biting wind, the way Bear had pressed against me to keep me alive, came rushing back, each memory sharpening the intensity of this moment. I felt the warmth of survival in my chest, mingling with the cold fury that had fueled my rebirth. Ethan's wife, Sarah, emerged from the kitchen, her face paling as she took in the scene. She did not look afraid. No, not truly, but calculating, like a predator sizing up a threat she could not yet comprehend. I saw her reach for her phone, fingers twitching, eyes darting, whispering something I could not hear, yet the effect was immediate. Ethan's initial shock morphed into a desperate, cornered intensity, a thin veneer of control slipping from his features. The man who had left me to die now seemed tiny and fragile, and the sight of his fear was a balm I hadn't realized I'd been longing for. I moved deliberately into the room, the soft clatter of my heels against the marble floor echoing like a metronome marking the beat of my revenge. Bear remained at my side, ears perked, muscles coiled in quiet readiness. My gaze swept the room, noting every detail, the expensive furniture, the expensive wine, the oblivious guests who now felt the weight of a story they had not anticipated. I could feel Ethan's eyes on me, unblinking, and I let the silence stretch, letting the tension build until it became almost unbearable. "I suppose you're wondering how I survived," I continued, voice softening slightly, allowing a trace of vulnerability to slip through the calculated calm. I let my fingers brush against Bear's fur, feeling the reassuring warmth of his body, the living proof that I had endured what I should never have endured alone. It wasn't luck. It wasn't fate. It was him, I said, nodding toward my loyal companion. He saved me when you would not, and every day since, I have prepared for this moment. The room felt smaller now, constrained by the invisible force of truth, memory, and revelation. Ethan's face was a mask of disbelief and dread, and I felt no pity, only a simmering, righteous anger that had been tempered into precision over 3 long years. My survival had been a crucible, shaping me into someone who could stand here, unbroken, unafraid, and finally, in control. Bear nudged my hand, a reminder that this moment was not about hatred alone, but justice, loyalty, and the unyielding bond that had carried us through the darkest night. I inhaled, tasting the sharp scent of broken glass and perfume, and took one final, deliberate step toward my son. "The mother you tried to kill stands before you, Ethan," I said, letting each word settle into the room like frost on a winter morning. "And the night you tried to bury me is over. You will answer for every choice, every betrayal, every cold, empty moment you left behind." I remember that night as if it were etched into my very bones, a frozen imprint that refused to fade no matter how much time passed. It was Christmas Eve, and though the world outside was bright with lights and laughter, inside me I felt fragile, more fragile than I had ever admitted to anyone, even to myself. Pneumonia had left me weak, my body trembling from the fevers that had racked me just weeks before. I trusted Isley because when you are sick, when you are vulnerable, the world seems to demand it. I trusted Ethan. I believed him when he said we were going to a specialist clinic in Denver. I believed because that is what mothers do. They see the best in their children, even when shadows linger in their hearts. Bear was restless from the moment we left the driveway. He paced in the back seat, whining softly, circling as if he could sense the unease I could not yet name. I glanced back at him, feeling the weight of his worry pressing against my own. His eyes, those piercing, honest eyes, seemed to ask questions I could not answer. My hand brushed against his fur absent-mindedly, a small comfort against the fear creeping up my spine. The snow outside the car windows shimmered in the dim glow of the headlights, and I felt an odd serenity, a false calm that made the betrayal that followed all the more unbearable. Ethan drove in silence for hours, the hum of the engine a lullaby that I mistook for reassurance. When he finally stopped on a deserted logging road, he muttered something about the engine overheating. I stepped out, shivering, and instinctively offered him my scarf, the wool still warm from my neck. "Here, honey, don't catch a cold," I said, the words falling softly from my lips. a gesture of care that had been instinctual for decades. I watched him take the scarf, his hands cold and unfeeling, his gaze fixed not on me but somewhere far away, as if I were already gone from his mind. Then he did something I will never forget. He threw Bear's leash out the window, and I saw my companion, my guardian, stumble slightly before he stopped, confused and alarmed. My heart clenched at the sight, a premonition I dared not voice. Ethan turned to me, his face expressionless, and muttered, "It's the only way, Mom. The nursing home costs too much." The words struck me like ice. I opened my mouth to speak, to argue, to beg, but the cold air filled my lungs and stole my voice. He dragged me from the car, my feet scraping against the snow, cold biting through the thin layers of my coat and the delicate warmth of my body. I felt the panic rise, a sudden, sharp pulse that made my chest ache. My eyes met Bear's for a brief second, and I saw the confusion, the loyalty, the silent promise that he would not abandon me even when the world turned cruel. I whispered to him, barely audible over the wind, "Stay, Bear, stay." But the leash was gone, the tether severed, and all I had left was faith in his heart and the hope that he would protect me even as my own son turned away. I watched as Ethan's taillights faded into the distance, leaving me shivering in the vast emptiness, the snow falling around me like silent accusations. I did not cry out for help. My voice had been stolen by betrayal, by disbelief, by the unbearable realization that the person I had trusted most had chosen greed over love. Instead, I cried in silence, tears freezing on my cheeks, because I understood something far more harrowing than cold. Ethan had not merely left me in the snow to save a few dollars. He had left me so that I would be out of the way, an obstacle removed, so he could sell my home and claim what he believed was his right. The magnitude of that truth sank into me like lead in my chest, each beat a reminder that the boy I had raised had become a stranger, a man capable of unimaginable cruelty. Bear nudged my side, his warm body pressing against mine, and I clung to him as the wind whipped around us. He licked my face gently, a gesture of comfort, of unspoken loyalty, of life itself. In that moment, I understood the depth of our bond, a bond forged not from blood, but from love, from survival, from trust that transcends words. He was my anchor, my shield, my silent witness to the darkest hour of my life. And though I trembled, though the snow seeped into my bones and the night pressed cold and merciless against me, I realized that I was not alone. Not entirely. Not yet. Hours passed in a blur of frost and despair. I curled against Bear, burying my face in his thick fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Each exhale was a whisper of hope, a reminder that life, even in the face of such betrayal, could persist. I whispered to him stories of warmth and home, of memories of Christmases long past, of days when laughter had filled the air and trust had been unbroken. He listened, as always, his presence a testament to the resilience of love in a world so often cruel. It was in that frozen, desolate night that I learned a truth that would define the years to come. Trust can be shattered, hearts can be broken, and yet survival does not demand vengeance. It demands courage, endurance, and the unwavering belief that even in betrayal, something worth living for remains. Bear had reminded me of that, and though my son had left me to die, though the ice had claimed my breath and the world had seemed indifferent, the seed of survival had been planted, nurtured by the warmth of a dog who refused to leave my side. As the darkness stretched interminably, I made a silent vow. I would live. I would not allow the cold, the betrayal, or the greed of a man I had once called my son to define the rest of my life. One day, the memory of this night would be the fire that forged my strength, the lens through which I would see justice, love, and the profound power of survival. And when that day came, he would remember me not as the frail woman he abandoned, but as the mother he tried to destroy, now risen from the ice, unwavering, unstoppable, and unbroken. The cold was no longer an external enemy. It had become an invader, inching its way into every joint, every muscle, every fragile beat of my heart. My teeth chattered uncontrollably, and I felt the sting of frostbite creeping along my fingers and toes. I wrapped myself around Bear as tightly as I could, burying my face in the thick fur of his neck, inhaling the warmth and the faint, comforting scent of him. He didn't move away, didn't chase after the disappearing taillights of the car that had abandoned me. Instead, he pressed his body firmly against mine, laying atop me as if to transfer every ounce of his heat into my frozen frame. His rough tongue licked gently at the frost encrusting my cheeks, and, for a fleeting moment, the terror of betrayal and the agony of the cold faded into the quiet reassurance of his presence. I whispered to him, my voice trembling, "I'm so cold, Bear, so very cold." He whined softly, nuzzling my face, a wordless promise that I would not be left behind, that I would not die alone. Hours passed in a blur of white and silence, the snow around us muffling even the howling wind. My body began to give in to exhaustion, to the deathly pull of hypothermia, and for a time I let my mind wander to a place of quiet resignation. I prayed not for myself, though I knew death was near, but for Bear, that someone kind would find him, feed him, care for him, and love him the way he deserved. That small hope was the only ember of warmth left in my heart. I closed my eyes, accepting the inevitability of the night, the betrayal, the cold that had claimed so many who were less fortunate, who had no Bear to shield them, no companion to anchor them to life. But Bear was not ready to give up. He let out a low, mournful howl that seemed to shake the very canyon walls, the sound raw, powerful, and insistent. It was a sound of defiance, of unbroken loyalty, of desperate determination. My eyes fluttered open as the echoes bounced back to us, a chorus of hope in the emptiness. I felt a surge of warmth, not of heat, but of life itself, coursing through my veins. His howls pierced the night, refusing to allow me to succumb. I stroked his fur weakly, murmuring encouragement between ragged breaths. "Yes, yes, Bear, keep going. We'll make it." It was then that a faint light appeared in the distance, slicing through the blackness like a narrow finger of salvation. I blinked, uncertain at first if my fever-addled mind was conjuring it, but the beam persisted, steady and deliberate. The sound of an engine followed, rough and old, and a truck rumbled along the snow-packed path. My heart lurched, an unfamiliar cocktail of fear and hope twisting within me. The truck stopped, tires crunching against the icy ground, and a figure emerged, a man, rough-looking, his face etched with years of hardship, his movements deliberate but careful. He held a flashlight that swept across the snow, catching Bear's vigilant eyes and mine in its beam. "Hey there," the man called out, his voice gruff but not unkind. He knelt, scanning the snow, and his gaze settled on us. There was a long pause, a moment of recognition, and then a slow smile broke across his face. He drove us to his cabin, a place that smelled of wood smoke, earth, and a faint trace of old books. It was humble, isolated, but it was warmth itself, a cocoon against the merciless cold outside. For weeks, I drifted in and out of fever, my body tethered tenuously to life by Bear's presence, and this stranger, who had appeared like a guardian angel. I remember waking once, weak and trembling, to find Silas feeding Bear steak from his own plate, smiling gently as if the dog were a child in need of comfort. Bear looked at me, his eyes filled with that same devotion, and I felt tears sting my cheeks. It was a quiet, simple act of humanity, yet it reverberated through me. A reminder that even in the depths of betrayal and cruelty, There were those who would choose compassion. Silas did not ask for thanks. He merely nodded toward me, and the understanding between us required no words. When my strength slowly returned, I tried to call the police, the urgency of justice pressing against my weakened body. But Silas stopped me, placing a large, calloused hand over mine. His eyes were steady, unyielding, carrying the weight of someone who had seen the world in all its light and darkness. "You might want to read this before you make any calls, Bernice," he said, handing me a folded newspaper clipping. The headline struck me like a physical blow. Tragic accident. Son mourns mother lost in hiking mishap, claims life insurance. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper fully, absorbing the words that confirmed everything I had feared and more. The depth of Ethan's deceit. The ease with which he had replaced familial love with cold calculation. I sank into the chair beside the small wood stove, Bear curling at my feet, his warmth a tether to life itself. I traced the edges of the paper with trembling fingers, the reality of my survival and the betrayal I had endured intertwining into a knot of grief and newfound determination. Silas's presence was a quiet anchor, a shield against despair. I realized then that I had been given more than life. I had been given the opportunity to rise, to rebuild, to reclaim what had been stolen from me. And Bear, ever faithful, ever true, would be at my side for every step. In that cabin, amidst the crackling fire and the shadows that danced along the walls, I understood the fragile beauty of survival. It is not merely living, it is the endurance of spirit, the capacity to forgive oneself for weakness, the ability to hold on to hope when all else is lost. Bear lay close, his body radiating warmth, and I felt the stirrings of something profound within me, a resolve that could not be broken, a courage born not from strength alone, but from love and loyalty, from the knowledge that even in the harshest winter, there can be guardians, angels, and the flicker of second chances. Living with Silas changed me in ways I could never have anticipated. The frail, timid woman who had once clung to Bear for warmth was no longer the same person. Days stretched into weeks, weeks into months, and I discovered a strength that I had never known I possessed. I chopped wood, each swing of the axe a rhythm that beat the fear out of my bones and replaced it with purpose. I hiked the rugged trails with Bear by my side, feeling the burn of my muscles, the sting of the cold, and the exhilaration of life returning, of blood coursing warmly through veins that had once been chilled to the marrow. Silas watched me quietly, sometimes from the porch with a steaming cup of tea in hand, his eyes twinkling with amusement or wisdom, or perhaps a combination of both. I learned from him that kindness without boundaries can be self-destruction, that love, even when freely given, must be tempered with discernment. Silas was a remarkable man, not only for the life he had led, but for the dignity with which he bore his own suffering. He was terminally ill, though he never let me see the full weight of it. There were moments when I caught a fleeting shadow cross his face, a small wince at a pain I could not ease. I spent the next year caring for him, not out of obligation or duty, but because he had saved me, because the world he had offered me was one of second chances, and because I had grown to love him as family, the kind chosen, not given by blood. Our mornings began with the aroma of coffee brewing over the stove, Bear padding silently beside us, tail wagging as if to mark the day with hope. We talked about small things, about the forest, about books, about memories that had been tucked away like fragile glass ornaments. I remember the day he passed away with crystal clarity. It was a quiet morning, sunlight spilling gently through the cabin's windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Silas lay in his bed, serene, breathing slowly, peacefully, as if the world itself had conspired to grant him a painless departure. I held his hand, feeling the last tremor of life leaving him, and I wept, not for the loss of him, for the depth of gratitude I felt for having known him, for having been given this unexpected chapter of life. Bear pressed against my leg, whining softly, his own grief mirroring mine, and together we stayed by Silas until the last breath had faded. The next day, his lawyer arrived, a man in a crisp suit and austere expression, carrying papers that would alter the course of my life yet again. Silas wasn't just a hermit, a recluse who had chosen solitude over society. He was a multi-millionaire who had invested wisely in land decades before, and in his will, he had left everything to me. I held the document in trembling hands, reading the words over and over. Bernice, the woman who restored my faith in humanity. My chest swelled, tears stinging my eyes, not just at the generosity, but at the validation of a life that had been nearly extinguished by betrayal and neglect. I was now wealthier than Ethan could ever dream of being, a thought that caused a faint, bittersweet smile to tug at my lips. I could have left that forest behind, moved to Florida, and surrendered to a life of quiet luxury. The temptation was real. I could almost see myself there, wrapped in silk robes, sipping tea by the ocean, forgetting the wounds of the past in the warm sun. But that night, as I scrolled through listings online, my breath caught. My old house, the one my husband had built with his own hands, where every nail, every brick, every corner held memories of love, laughter, and family, was being demolished. The listing revealed the seller's name, Ethan. The blood drained from my face, replaced by a calm, icy determination. It was no longer a question of comfort or ease. It was a matter of justice. Peace, I realized, would be meaningless without the reclamation of what was stolen, without confronting the man who had abandoned me to die. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, Bear resting his head on my lap, his presence a steady reassurance. The pain of that night in the snow returned, sharp and raw, but it was tempered by the memory of the fire that Silas had nurtured in me, the strength I had discovered within my own body and soul. I whispered to Bear, "It's time, old friend. It's time we show them what it means to cross us." He thumped his tail gently against my leg, as if he understood every word, every unspoken vow. The twist of fate had given me more than survival. It had given me agency. It had given me the power to rise from the ruins of my past and to confront the injustice that had festered like a shadow over my life. Silas had saved me, yes, but it was now my turn to act, to take control, to ensure that the wrongs of the past were addressed. I thought of Ethan, of the man who had abandoned his mother for money, and of the life he had built on deception and cruelty. My heart beat with a mixture of sorrow and resolve, a delicate tension that carried me forward, knowing that my actions in the days to come would define not only my future, but the legacy of those I loved. I looked at Bear, his blue eyes steady, unwavering, and I felt a warmth that no money or luxury could ever replicate. The warmth of loyalty, of survival, and of love that had endured the harshest trials. My hands tightened around the paper listing my inheritance, my resolve solidifying. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about reclaiming what had been taken, protecting the bonds that mattered, and proving to myself that even after the coldest betrayal, one could rise, one could rebuild, and one could choose a life guided not by fear, but by courage. That night, as the fire in the cabin crackled and shadows danced along the walls, I made a vow to myself. Ethan would not only face justice, but I would do so without losing the essence of who I had become. I would act with wisdom, patience, and precision, because the power of survival is not in the impulse of anger, but in the deliberate strength that comes from enduring and learning. The twist of fate had placed the tools in my hands, and I would wield them not with hatred, but with the quiet, unshakable force of a life renewed, of a woman reborn from snow, betrayal, and loss. I didn't reveal myself yet. Not a single person could know who I had become, who I had risen to be from the snow, the betrayal, and the long years of rebuilding. I dyed my hair a shade that was neither the silver of my wintered past nor the brown of my youth, something in between, ambiguous, safe. One rented a small but elegant condo in the city, one registered under a shell company, a place where I could observe the world without being observed. Bear settled quickly into the new space, his paws padding silently over the hardwood floors, nose twitching at the faint sense of the city that drifted through the open window. The dog's steady presence reminded me that I was not merely a ghost in this world, that I had the power to act, and that I was never alone. The private investigator arrived quietly, a man who moved with the precision of someone who had spent years in shadows, watching, listening, gathering truth that people believed could be hidden. He was discreet, methodical, and thorough. Bear seemed to approve immediately, sitting beside him as if recognizing a fellow protector. Each week, we would sit together in my living room, Bear curled at my feet, as the investigator laid out photographs and documents, evidence collected without alerting Ethan or Sarah to the storm that was silently gathering. I watched them, frozen in pictures of opulence and ease. They were living in a world built from lies, from greed, from the insurance money paid for my presumed death. Luxury cars gleamed under city lights. Trips to Europe displayed like trophies of the life they thought they had stolen. My chest ached, not from jealousy, but from the quiet rage and grief that settled deep in my bones, a cold, slow fire. The investigator's findings sent a shiver through me, cold and sharp. Sarah wasn't merely a passive participant in their deceit. No, she had orchestrated far more than I had suspected. Records revealed that she had taken out the insurance policy on me 3 months before Ethan abandoned me on that freezing logging road. My fingers tightened around the edge of the photos, knuckles white. My lips pressed into a thin line as Bear nudged my hand gently, sensing my rising tension, offering comfort in the quiet, loyal way that only he could. I exhaled slowly, letting the warmth of his body seep into me, grounding me. The truth was worse than I had feared. My survival had been premeditated, and the cruelty of their planning gnawed at me in quiet, bitter waves. I began following them, slipping into shadows, observing from a distance, always careful to remain unseen. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in a small coffee shop, 2 booths away from them. I sipped my tea slowly, careful to mask the pounding of my heart. I could see Sarah's face clearly, the tight set of her jaw, the dangerous glint in her eyes as she whispered to Ethan. I leaned in slightly, listening, straining to catch every word. "Stop worrying about the dog. Even if it survives, it can't talk. We need that money for the gambling debts, Ethan," she hissed, her words sharp as shards of glass. I froze, my blood running cold, the betrayal of that moment more jagged than the night in the snow. This wasn't just greed. It was desperation, a sickness, a recklessness that had driven them to forsake everything that should have mattered. Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line, nodding subtly, eyes darting nervously. My stomach churned, not merely with anger, but with the dawning realization that the consequences of their choices were far deeper than I had imagined. Then I saw who they were meeting, a man whose presence radiated menace, a shady figure with the air of someone used to power bought through fear. A loan shark. The truth slammed into me, more complex than the simple cruelty I had imagined. Ethan hadn't merely abandoned me out of callousness. He had sacrificed me, chosen to leave me to die in order to save his own skin from debts he could not pay. The layers of betrayal intertwined with fear and survival, and my chest tightened with a mixture of sorrow, disgust, and the sharp edge of understanding. He wasn't evil in the simple, black-and-white way I had thought. He was weak, desperate, corrupt, a man who had made the cruelest choice of his life and paid the consequences in the lives of those around him. I stared at them across the coffee shop, Bear sitting quietly beside my chair, eyes fixed on me with unwavering loyalty. His steady presence reminded me that the world was not all cruelty, that survival did not demand vengeance alone, but also clarity, strategy, and patience. I thought of Silas, of the warmth of the cabin, of the lessons I had learned about strength tempered with compassion. I realized then that my next steps could not be merely emotional. They had to be deliberate, measured, and unyielding. The images of their lavish life juxtaposed with the reality of their debts, and the deception they had woven around me set a new fire within me, one that was cold, precise, and determined. This was no longer about the pain of being left to freeze, nor solely about reclaiming what was mine. It was about understanding the full web of choices, fears, and greed that had orchestrated my suffering, and then dismantling it with calculated purpose. Bear leaned against my leg, sensing the resolve solidifying within me, and I felt a deep, almost spiritual sense of partnership. Together, we would face what was coming. Together, we would act with the knowledge that justice, tempered with wisdom, could restore the balance stolen from us. I took a deep breath, my hands still trembling slightly from both anger and anticipation, and whispered to Bear, "It's more than money, old friend. It's everything, and we'll make sure they pay for every bit of it." He thumped his tail softly against the floor, his warm eyes never leaving mine. In that quiet moment, surrounded by photographs and evidence, I felt the full weight of the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal, the survival, the trust in Silas, the loyalty of Bear, all of it converged into a singular, unshakable resolve. I was no longer the woman abandoned in the snow. I was a force, patient and deliberate, ready to reclaim the life that had been stolen from me and to see the truth revealed, no matter how long it took, no matter how deep the shadows ran. I realized quickly that the path to justice was not through anger alone. Anger, I had learned, is a flame that burns the soul if left unchecked. No, I needed strategy, precision, and a way to strike at the heart of their hubris, their obsession with status and appearances. They thrived on the illusion of power, the comfort of wealth, and the envy of others. That was where I would hit them, where it would hurt most. Using the inheritance Silas had so generously left me, I contacted the loan shark who had lent money to Ethan and Sarah. I bought the debt note in its entirety, legally, irrevocably. In that moment, I held a strange and terrible power. Technically, I now owned my son. The realization made my stomach twist. I felt a cold satisfaction but tempered with sorrow, because ownership of a person, even one who had betrayed you, carries its own weight, its own moral gravity. Bear lay at my feet as I studied the paperwork, his head resting gently against my lap. I stroked his fur absently, feeling the warmth and loyalty radiating from him. His presence reminded me that this was not vengeance for the sake of cruelty. It was reclamation, restoration, a quiet, patient assertion that the wronged could rise and act with dignity. I whispered to him, "We'll do this right, old friend." Not with hate, but with purpose. His tail thumped softly in response, steady and reassuring, and I felt the weight of courage settle into my chest. The next step required a more subtle approach. I created a charitable foundation under the name The Bear Trust, a gesture that was half tribute, half strategy. The foundation promised to support local families in need, and I began to weave myself into social circles I had once been estranged from. Every appearance was carefully curated: large sunglasses, wide-brimmed hats, and an air of mysterious philanthropy that kept my identity hidden. People whispered about the generous benefactor with speculation, never guessing that the woman moving among them was the very mother Ethan had abandoned to die. An idea took shape that was audacious, yet perfect. I would lure them to a gala, a pinnacle of local society, where they would feel the intoxicating promise of salvation. The invitation was anonymous, carefully crafted, stating that the mysterious benefactor would clear the debts of worthy local families. I imagined the desperation that would twist their faces, the hope that would cloud their judgment. Ethan and Sarah, both eager and fearful, would believe themselves to be the beneficiaries of someone's grace, their egos and greed entwined in a dance of anticipation. As the day of the gala approached, I felt a mixture of anticipation and nostalgia. I visited the lot where my old house had once stood. The sight of empty dirt made my heart ache. My husband's craftsmanship, the walls that had held our laughter, our love, every memory of a family's life, reduced to dust and absence. Tears blurred my vision, and I knelt, touching the cold, bare soil. Bear nudged my hand gently with his snout, as if to remind me that strength and resolve were more important than grief in this moment. I whispered to him, "We'll be strong, my friend. We always have to be strong." As I wandered the lot, my eyes caught on a small, rusted locket half buried in the dirt. My fingers trembled as I brushed away the soil and opened it. Inside was a picture of Ethan as a baby, round-cheeked and innocent, a boy I had once held in my arms, dreaming of his future. My throat tightened and a wave of sorrow swept over me. The boy in the photograph was gone. Only the man remained, the man who had abandoned me, who had allowed greed to eclipse every trace of love, who had become a monster in the space of years. I pressed the locket to my chest, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. And yet, amid the grief, a strange clarity emerged. That boy had vanished, yes, but the monster he had become was now visible, predictable, and vulnerable. The gala would be the stage upon which his true self would be revealed, stripped of the illusions of wealth and respectability. I felt a quiet resolve settle into the core of my being. This was not about cruelty. It was about balance, about showing the consequences of choices, about reclaiming what had been stolen from me, not just materially, but spiritually, emotionally. I rose from the dirt, the locket still clutched in my hand, and exhaled slowly. Bear trotted beside me, his blue eyes reflecting trust and unwavering loyalty. He had been my shield in the mountains, my anchor in the cabin, my witness in the city. Now, he would stand beside me again as we moved forward into the web we had woven with care, patience, and quiet precision. In that moment, the cold bitterness of the past transformed into a focused determination. I would not be blinded by anger or consumed by revenge. I would act with purpose, guided by justice and the lessons learned from the trials I had endured. The gala was more than a trap. It was a revelation, a culmination of the survival, resilience, and love that had brought me from near death to power, from betrayal to clarity. I held the locket one last time, pressing it softly to my lips. "You may have taken everything from me, Ethan," I whispered to the empty lot, "but you will never take my resolve, my dignity, or the bond that Bear and I share. The boy is gone, and the monster is about to learn what it means to be seen for what he truly is." Bear barked softly, a sound of agreement, of solidarity, and I felt a warmth that no money, no deceit, no betrayal could ever diminish. The trap was set, the stage prepared, and the storm that had been brewing for years was finally ready to descend. I could feel Ethan's eyes drilling into me the moment the room fell silent. The dinner party polished silver, curated wines. Expensive centerpieces meant to impress people who barely cared had turned into a stage of ghosts. And I was the ghost he never expected to see again. The air felt thick, almost gelatinous, as though every breath had to be pushed through layers of disbelief and guilt. Ethan's hands trembled so badly that the wine in his glass sloshed over the rim. His lips parted as if his voice had forgotten how to function. "Mom," he finally managed, the word cracking like something brittle snapping. We looked for you." His throat bobbed, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for support. "We did. We tried everything." Even now, at the brink of exposure, he chose lies. not hesitation, not remorse, lies. The guests exchanged glances, confusion, surprise, a few whispers traveling like little sparks of electricity. Sarah moved in front of him with a smoothness that made it clear this wasn't the first time she had taken the lead. Her expression sharpened into something venomous, something that expected the world to kneel for her convenience. "This is ridiculous," she hissed, her voice ready with panic masked as indignation. "This is a trick, a scam. Bernice had dementia. Everyone knows that." She jabbed a finger at me, her face twisting. "This woman is an imposter, a very bold imposter trying to extort us." The word imposter hung in the air like smoke. My heart pinched, not because of the accusation, but because of how quickly she had prepared the lie, as if she had rehearsed it years ago, waiting for the day when the truth might claw its way back from the grave they dug for me. "Dementia?" I repeated softly, a whisper lined with disbelief. Then the whisper cracked into a laugh, sharp, cold, cutting enough to make several guests flinch. "Is that the story you told everyone? How convenient." I reached into my coat and pulled out the folded envelope I had prepared. "I have my medical records, Sarah. Pneumonia, treatable pneumonia, nothing more." I let the corner of the envelope tap lightly against my palm. "But dementia certainly makes for a cleaner narrative, doesn't it? Easier to justify why you took out an insurance policy on me months before my disappearance." I watched the blood drain from her face, leaving her skin a shade of chalky beige. Her mouth thinned into a line that trembled at the edges, like a mask beginning to crack. "You need to leave," she spat, voice rising, desperation leaking through the cracks. "Get out of my house." She lunged toward the fireplace mantel and grabbed a heavy bronze statue, some abstract shape meant to look expensive rather than meaningful. Her knuckles whitened around it as she lifted it like a weapon. Before I could react, Bear stepped between us. He let out a bark so powerful, so deep, that the windows vibrated. The room froze. Guests stiffened, forks clattering against plates, breaths caught mid-air. Sarah stumbled backward, clutching the statue to her chest as if it were a shield. Her face went gray with fear. "That's enough," Ethan muttered, reaching out to steady her. But she jerked away from his touch as though he had burned her. The unity they had pretended to have in front of their friends was collapsing inch by inch. I took a slow breath, grounding myself. My hands were steady. My heart beat. Calm. I wasn't here to scream or accuse. The truth didn't need theatrics to stand tall. "It's not your house," I said quietly, letting the words fall into the tense silence like pebbles into still water. Sarah blinked. "What?" I pulled a second document from my coat thicker, stamped, undeniably official. I unfolded it with deliberate slowness, giving them time to feel the dread creep under their skin. "In fact," I continued, "legally speaking, this house hasn't been yours for a while." I walked closer, the paper dangling between my fingers. Ethan stared at it as if it were a live grenade. "I bought the mortgage this morning. The entire thing. Every cent." I let my gaze sweep across the room, meeting the eyes of the stunned guests who had believed this couple to be pillars of refinement. "You haven't made a payment in 6 months." Sarah inhaled sharply, as if she were about to drown. "And I'm not here as a guest," I finished, placing the document gently on the dining table, right next to a half-eaten creme brulee. "I'm here to evict you." The word evict detonated silently. I saw it ripple through Ethan's posture, shoulders collapsing inward, chin trembling, his entire body folding like a man suddenly stripped bare. He looked at me with something like pleading flickering behind his fear. "Mom, please," he whispered. Not even a sentence, just a cracked fragment of a broken boy. Not a grown man. "Please don't do this." I stared at him. At the son who had dragged me out into the snow. At the boy who once clung to my legs when he was scared of thunderstorms. At the man who had let greed swallow the child he used to be. "I didn't come here tonight to hurt you, Ethan," I said softly. "I came so you would see me. alive, undeniable, the truth you tried to bury. His knees buckled. Sarah stepped back from him as though distancing herself from the sinking ship she had helped steer. Bear moved closer to me, his presence grounding, anchoring. For a moment, no one spoke. The room held its breath. The chandeliers glittered above us, casting reflections like ice shards onto the walls. Everything looked beautiful and cold, perfectly fitting for the night the truth finally thawed its way into the open. Ethan's hands shook as he stared at the papers. His eyes darted between me, the documents, and Sarah like a man caught in the storm of his own making. The slick veneer of the sophisticated, composed man he pretended to be cracked, revealing the scared, desperate boy beneath. "Mom, please," he said, his voice trembling, thick with the weight of panic and guilt. "It was Sarah. She made me do it. She said we'd lose everything. She said, if we didn't, we'd be ruined." His eyes were glassy, pleading, yet I could see through them the layers of cowardice that had left me in the snow. The boy I once knew, the one who used to cling to my hand on stormy nights, was gone, replaced by a man terrified of consequences, incapable of standing for what was right. Sarah spun toward him, her face twisted in fury and shame, the mask she had worn for so long now fractured by fear. "Don't you dare blame me!" she shrieked, her voice like a whip, sharp and cutting. "You're the one who drove the car? You're the one who left her in the snow? You're the one who dragged me into this mess." She jabbed a finger at him, her nails digging into the air as though trying to claw back the respect she had lost to her own desperation. The two of them erupted into an argument, voices overlapping, each word raw with accusation and regret. Secrets spilled out like water from a broken dam, each confession. Each lie, each betrayal, a piece of the puzzle I had been trying to assemble for 3 long years. I listened, silent but attentive, my heart tightening and loosening in rhythm with the revelations. Every lie they had told, every act of cruelty they had hidden, every desperate attempt to cover their sins was laid bare before me. I raised my phone quietly, pressing record. Every word, every frantic gasp, every tear-streaked confession would serve as evidence not only for justice, but for my own healing. I had learned that the truth could be a balm, even when it was jagged and painful. And I wanted the world to hear it, to witness the ugliness that had masqueraded as wealth, sophistication, and familial devotion. And then, just as the cacophony reached its peak, a sound cut through it like a knife. Small, tentative footsteps running down the stairs. "Daddy? Mommy?" The voice was tentative, uncertain, yet laced with fear and confusion. My breath caught in my throat. I turned slowly, trying to place the sound, to prepare myself for what I might see. The moment my eyes fell on her, my heart stopped and shattered all at once. It was Lily, my granddaughter. The child I had been told was away at boarding school for years, excused as a necessary arrangement, a child supposedly too delicate to be in the world. She was no longer a polished, well-dressed boarding school girl. She looked thin, fragile, as though the luxury surrounding her family had never touched her. Her clothes were ragged, faded, and torn in small places. She clutched a dirty, threadbare doll to her chest as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to safety. Her wide eyes, filled with a mixture of fear and yearning, scanned the room, unsure of what she was seeing, what she should expect from the shouting, the anger and the chaos that had erupted around her. I stepped toward her slowly, feeling my throat tighten and tears welling. My voice trembled, uncertain at first, as though the words might shatter like glass if I spoke too loudly. "Lily, sweetheart, it's okay. It's me, Grandma." My hands reached out toward her, quivering, not from fear, but from the overwhelming surge of love and sorrow. She paused for a moment, as if evaluating whether to trust this stranger who claimed to be her grandmother. Then, slowly, She let go of the doll, her small hands trembling, and inched toward me. Bear came forward, sensing her hesitation, and sat beside her, allowing her to drape herself against his thick fur. The dog's calm, warm presence seemed to reassure her in a way that human words could not. She buried her face against him, and I felt the first soft exhalation of relief in years. My composure broke for the first time. Tears ran freely down my cheeks as I knelt to meet her at eye level. "Oh, my sweet girl, they told me you were away. Safe." My voice cracked, and I swallowed hard, trying to steady the quiver in my chest. "But here you are, and you've been alone for so long." She looked up at me, her eyes enormous and shining, and whispered, I thought you were gone forever, Grandma." Her voice was faint, fragile, but it carried a weight that made my heart ache. I gathered her in my arms, holding her close, feeling the warmth of her tiny body, the pulse of life against mine. Bear nudged her gently, as though encouraging her to let herself be held, to accept the comfort of safety. In that moment, all the anger, all the fear, all the betrayal I had carried for years softened into a single, overwhelming truth. Nothing mattered more than her safety, her trust, her ability to feel loved and seen. Ethan and Sarah stared, frozen, as if the very air had conspired against them. The facade of wealth and control shattered, revealing the raw, ugly reality beneath. Their eyes were wide, not with fear of being caught in a legal sense, but with the realization that their actions had consequences far beyond what they had imagined. They had taken my life. They had taken my freedom. They had hidden a child in shame, and now the truth was standing before them in the form of the granddaughter they neglected. I pressed my forehead against Lily's soft hair, whispering promises I had never thought I'd get the chance to make. "I won't let them hurt you anymore. I'll protect you always, I promise." Bear leaned against me, a sentinel of loyalty and warmth, and I felt a fragile, trembling peace settle around us. The room seemed to shrink, focusing only on the three of us, myself, Lily, and Bear. All the past horrors, the cold nights, the betrayals, the abandonments, crystallized into a single clarity. We were together now, and that togetherness was unbreakable. In the midst of the chaos and the revealed truths, I felt an unfamiliar, quiet hope. Perhaps this was the beginning not just of justice, but of restoration, of love reborn from the fractures of the past. Seeing Lily standing there, fragile and trembling, my heart splintered into pieces I thought I had long buried. The fire of anger I had carried for years, the righteous fury at betrayal, greed, and cruelty shifted instantly. It wasn't about financial ruin anymore. The revenge I had meticulously planned, the debts I had bought, the gala, the mortgage, it all faded into the background. The only thing that mattered in that moment was her safety, her well-being, the stolen years she had endured. "Bear, go to her," I commanded softly, and the dog moved with fluid precision, understanding the urgency in my voice. He trotted up the stairs with the grace of a creature attuned to human emotion. When he reached Lily, he sat gently beside her, offering a protective presence as she wrapped her small arms around his neck. Bear's warmth, the steady pulse of his heart beneath his thick fur, seemed to communicate to her what words could not. "You are safe now." I knelt a few feet away, my chest tight, watching the fragile interplay between child and dog. The sight of her clinging to him made something inside me ache. Years of absence, of neglect, of silent suffering, all made tangible in the tremor of her small body. I whispered under my breath, more to myself than to anyone else, "You monsters. It wasn't enough to leave me in the snow to die? You neglected your own child?" Sarah's sneer cut across the room, harsh and cold. "She's a burden, just like you were." The words, intended to wound, only hardened my resolve. Every syllable carried the contempt and twisted justification that had allowed them to hide the truth for so long. I could feel the rage rising inside me, the suppressed violence of 3 years' worth of pain and scheming pressing against the walls of my calm exterior. But I held it in check, because this was not about rage, it was about justice and protection. I drew a slow breath, my hands trembling slightly as I allowed the rage to transform into focused action. "I didn't just buy the house, Ethan," I said, my voice trembling, heavy with the weight of all I had endured, all I had planned, all I had suffered. "I brought guests." The sound of the front door unlocking echoed in the room, soft at first, then gaining presence, a quiet herald of the reckoning to come. Police officers stepped in, their badges catching the light from the chandeliers, along with a representative from Child Protective Services. They moved with professional efficiency, but their presence, calm and authoritative, immediately shifted the energy of the room. I had sent the investigators' evidence to them hours ago, every recorded word, every document, every thread of proof meticulously compiled, and now the moment had come for truth to step fully into the light. Ethan and Sarah froze, their faces a mix of disbelief, fear, and rage. The illusion they had lived under, the carefully curated world of wealth, control, and deceit, crumbled in an instant. I watched Ethan's eyes widen as he realized that no charm, no pleading, no half-truths could undo what was happening. He glanced at Sarah, then back at me, and for the first time, the veneer of control slipped entirely. As the officers approached, placing gentle but firm hands on their arms, Ethan looked at me with tears threatening to spill, raw vulnerability breaking through the years of selfishness. "Mom, I'm your son," he said, his voice cracked and fragile, carrying a weight of regret that seemed to stretch back across the years, back to the mountains, the snow, the betrayal. I shook my head slowly, the last vestige of my old maternal hope giving way to a deeper understanding of who he had become. "No," I said softly, turning my back on him. Each word was deliberate, a sentence carved out of grief and clarity. "My son died in the mountains 3 years ago." I took a step toward Lily, and she ran to me, arms open, her small body pressing against mine as I gathered her into my embrace. I could feel her tremble, her tiny heartbeat racing against mine, and I whispered over and over, "You're safe now. You're safe. I promise. I'll never let anyone hurt you again." Bear settled at our feet, his presence steady, unflinching, a quiet sentinel for both of us. The officers guided Ethan and Sarah toward the door, reading them their rights, while I held Lily tightly, feeling the immense weight of responsibility and love settle into me. The house, once a stage for lies and cruelty, was now a sanctuary of protection, truth, and reclamation. Lily's small hands clung to mine as we walked to the living room, where Bear nudged her gently, ensuring she felt the calm continuity of care. I looked out the window at the winter night beyond, the snow faintly reflecting the light of the street lamps, and I felt an unexpected peace. It was a cold, harsh world, yes, but in this house, with this child, with my dog by my side, a warmth of purpose and love had taken root. I pressed my cheek to Lily's hair, inhaling her faint, sweet scent, and felt the culmination of my journey. The cold bitterness of betrayal had finally been replaced with a protective, nurturing fire. The vengeance I had imagined in my darkest dreams had transformed into rescue and reclamation. And the realization struck me with profound clarity. True power is not measured by wealth, not by retribution, but by the ability to protect, to nurture, and to restore the broken. And in that quiet, trembling moment as police led the monsters of my past away, I understood that the mountains had not only tested my body and spirit, they had prepared me to save what mattered most. I had survived. I had reclaimed my life. And for the first time in years, I could feel the warmth of hope taking root, steady and unshakable, in the arms of the little girl who was finally home. The legal battle was mercifully short. With the recording of their confessions, the documentation of their fraud, and the proof of Lily's neglect, the court had no choice. Ethan and Sarah were sentenced to 20 years, their carefully constructed world crumbling in a courtroom that demanded accountability. It wasn't just justice, it was relief, a release of a weight I hadn't realized I had been carrying for so long. The atmosphere in the courtroom, once heavy with tension, lifted the moment the gavel fell. I felt a tremor run through me, part exhaustion, part catharsis, part disbelief that the nightmare had finally ended. Adopting Lily was the most natural thing in the world, yet the most challenging. She had spent years hidden, neglected, and silenced, and trust was a fragile, delicate thing. Every smile had to be earned, every word of comfort weighed carefully. I approached her with infinite patience, letting her set the pace. Bear was the bridge between us, a steady constant of warmth and reassurance. He never left her side, allowing her to cling to him, to feel safe, to rediscover the joy of connection without fear. Watching them together was like witnessing a sunrise after a long, brutal winter, the kind that fills your chest with hope you didn't know could exist again. Using Silas's inheritance, I rebuilt the house my husband had built with his own hands. But I didn't just restore it, I expanded it, filling it with rooms and spaces meant to embrace others, to offer sanctuary and solace. It became more than a home. It became a refuge for elderly people who, like I had once been, were abandoned by those who should have loved them. Each room held a purpose. Each window framed the mountains in a way that invited contemplation and healing. The scent of fresh pine and polished wood mingled with the lingering aroma of cookies and bread baking in the kitchen. It was alive, vibrant, and welcoming. Evenings were my favorite. Sitting on the porch with Lily and Bear beside me, the sky painting itself in hues of amber, rose, and gold, I felt the weight of the years fall away. Bear lay stretched at my feet, his fur warm against my ankles, his steady breathing a gentle reminder that life could be simple, secure, and tender. Lily rested her head on my lap, tracing gentle patterns on my hands, the bond between us finally solidifying into something that felt eternal. "Grandma," Lily asked one evening, her voice soft and tinged with curiosity, "do you miss him?" Her eyes were wide, reflecting the fiery sky, filled with the unspoken question. Do the wounds of the past still hurt? Do the memories linger? I gazed at the horizon, at the mountains we had once traversed in fear and despair, and I felt a peace I hadn't known in decades. Not joy, not lightheartedness, but a deep, quiet, heavy peace. The kind that comes when the storm has passed and you are left standing in the calm it leaves behind. "I miss who I thought he was, sweetie," I said, my voice low and steady, each word weighted with memory and acceptance. "But I love who we are now, and I love you. That's what matters." Lily leaned closer, resting against me, and Bear exhaled a long, contented sigh, placing his head gently on my knee. The air smelled of pine and earth, the kind of scent that promises continuity and life beyond grief. For the first time in years, the cold, the fear, the loneliness, the betrayal was truly gone. We were safe. We were together. We were home. In that quiet, tender moment, I realized that all the suffering, all the survival, all the intricate planning for justice had led to this singular, perfect clarity. Love, protection, and healing were worth more than any vengeance or punishment. And as the sun dipped below the peaks, bathing us in its warm, forgiving light, I understood that life could indeed begin anew, even after the deepest betrayal. Bear lifted his head slightly, his eyes meeting mine with that same unwavering loyalty that had saved me so long ago. Lily yawned, curling herself against me, and I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the sound of their presence. It was a lullaby of life reclaimed, of peace restored, of a family rebuilt from the shards of past pain. If you've followed Bernice's journey, witnessed her struggle, survival, and ultimate triumph, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to keep watching stories of resilience, courage, and the human spirit overcoming the impossible. Together, we celebrate hope, second chances, and the warmth that comes when we finally find our way home.